Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, geeks and nerds and ambassadors everywhere, and welcome back to the Ambassadorial Wing and another installment in the Ambassadors Retro Reviews. And I hope everyone's having a great weekend. Hope you all are having a wonderful Saturday night. We are live here this evening, and we're going to be picking up with a series of reviews that I have kind of neglected over the last year. But I'm very happy to be continuing with you tonight. And tonight, we put another installment into the Ambassador's Retro Reviews with a personal favorite of mine from the 1980s, James Cameron's The Abyss. And with me tonight, I have got a first-timer to the Ambassadorial Wing. This is a gentleman that I met recently, him and his lovely wife, who was actually in the chat of Netter's Network. Netter, is a pleasure to have you here this evening with us, my dear, and appreciate you tuning in and joining us in the chat. So give a very warm ambassadorial welcome to Mr. Troy Pacelli.
Oh, I thank you
Troy,
so much, Ambassador.
You are very welcome, Troy. I appreciate you coming in tonight and joining me for the reviews. So, for those that are new to you here, obviously there's going to be many who are. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, a little about your channel, and where they can find you on the socials, and then we will jump right in. So,
sure. I don't even have to spell it out because it's right there at the bottom, Troy Pacelli. So if you want to just look me up on the YouTubes, that's the channel I'm going under. I have a Friday night live chat every week, usually talking about geek topics. Sometimes it's just crazy old drunken rambles. Sometimes we get real specific. We do a couple of ongoing series where we kind of take some of our favorite franchises that have kind of gone a little caca and reimagine a world where they didn't. So, for example, the DC, cinematic universe, we imagine a world that if back when they started Smallville, they had plans to create a larger television, cinema, comic book integrated universe, how that might have looked. If they hadn't gone through their whole not allowing their peas and carrots to touch on their plate period, kind of thing, which led to multiple versions of Superman and Batman, in live action. We do the same thing with, you remember, Universal tried over and over and over again to get some sort of a dark universe with their Monsterverse going, and completely botched it, whether it was, Dracula Untold or that horrible Mummy movie or whatever.
Ooh,
and
yes.
And we kind of go back to brass tacks and rethink the Universal monsters. So there's that. And then, do a lot of Star Wars talk. Do you know Stephanie Janicek of Stephanie Janicek's Smuggler's Cantina?
I've actually heard of her. Excuse me. I have heard of her, but I've never actually had the opportunity to check out any of her content. But yeah, sure. I am aware of her.
I've had her on a couple of times, and we've talked Star Wars. We did a lot during this Book of Boba Fett run, and that's what my channel is. Although I do some regular guest appearances, like later tonight, I will be guesting on my beautiful wife Netter of Netter's Network. Her channel, we're going to be doing a rewatch of Beetlejuice.
Oh.
Yeah.
I might have to pop in for a little bit on that one.
Oh, it would be awesome if you did. Let's see. On Sundays, Aged Boomer, you can look him up on YouTube as well. We do a show called Geeky Geezers, where we basically take the week's geeky news and kind of break it down, and we try to keep it as even as possible. But yeah, we do editorialize a bit. So, I mean, I'm just being upfront and honest about it. I'll let you guys know when the bias is there,
I've done my fair share of editorializing myself, so you're not alone in that. So, well, Troy, a pleasure to have you with me tonight. And like I said, it's been a bit since I've done one of these retro reviews, going back to my childhood, the 80s, which, let's be candid here, is, I think, one of the greatest decades for cinema, for pop culture in general. You know, you talk about TV series, you talk about movies, you talk about animated shows, and so on. The 80s had it all. And of course,
you got a lot of toys that came out of there. You also had the rise of cable television, which meant that we got to see a lot more types of productions than we did before.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And tonight, of course, we are going to be hitting upon one of the kings of the 80s, one of his lesser-known works, but I think a very unique film, and that's, of course, James Cameron's The Abyss. Yeah. And to kind of kick this off, as always, this is one that I never had the opportunity to see in theaters. I was at the time too young, and it didn't necessarily seem like my type of film, honestly. And, well, obviously, I didn't have a real particular taste for films. I knew what I liked to a degree as a kid, but it wouldn't be until I got much older that I was like, I want to check this out now. So back in the grand old days when Blockbuster was still a thing, me and Mother Ambassador would make our weekly trips to Blockbuster once we got our VCR, and we picked this little puppy up, and I was like, holy crap, James Cameron made this? Mr. Terminator made this? And I'm like, this is good. I mean, this was his first foray and I think this is where his love of deep sea diving and the ocean really came through. And not to mention, in terms of the technological advances for this film, they were immense.
Well, you mentioned Terminator. My understanding is that this film really pioneered those computer graphics, that the facial morphing and so forth, that eventually ended up being used in Terminator 2 for the T-1000.
Oh yes, absolutely, with the water tentacle in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And not to mention, you had a lot of miniature work, you had a lot of special photography work done for this, particularly with the pilots of the different size submersibles. Yep. They really were able to hone that and get it to where it was where it was much more seamless, where it didn't feel like it was somebody inside being filmed and then them rotoscoping it in on the model submersible.
Yeah.
There's a lot, I have another friend there. I think his name is Zach Leary. He says that, and I agree with this. It was more fun to not know necessarily how they did all this, but it is still interesting to dig into exactly how they did all this. And they had to be so creative because you couldn't just plug everything into a computer and the computer do it for you. You had to figure it out. You had to MacGyver it, essentially.
And even my understanding is some of the computer graphics that they did do, Cameron wasn't too satisfied with, so he tried to go practical whenever he could. And I mean, visually it worked out great, but what those people went through on set was a trip.
Well, yeah, because the thing that Cameron commented on about this film, he wanted it to have a slower pace because he felt that when you're underwater, it seems like time slows down.
Right.
And both versions of this movie, run at clock in at over 2.5 or almost 2.5 hours with the extended cut, and just a shade under 2.5. It's like 2 hours and 17 minutes for just the regular cut. But it still had that slower pace to it. And the thing that I appreciate about it was the world building, for one, because it was very fast paced, but at the same time, the world building was, I think, executed well. But also one of the interesting things for me is, granted, all the technical aspects of a movie are very fascinating to dig into, and we'll definitely dig into them tonight. But the characters.
Exactly. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, this is by no means an archetype. This is not a atypical or a archetype type cast. These characters have a lot of layers to them.
I saw a lot of similarities to the characterizations you saw in Alien. You know, it was a bunch of blue collar workers that people could relate to. They didn't fit into your typical mold of your heroes from your typical genre films. These were just, oh yeah, I know people like that.
Yeah, and well, we all do to varying degrees do know people like this. I mean, we know somebody like Bud, played by Ed Harris. We know somebody. We know somebody like Lindsay. What was the last saying? Brigman, played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who would later go on to do Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Right,
played Maid Marian. Right. She was absolute delight in that. But
well, I mean, think about Lisa. You know, played by Kimberly Scott. She was a hoot, you know, but she was a quirky character that doesn't in no way fits into any mold. You can't say, oh, she's like that character from that other movie. No, I defy you to come up with a character like her, you know?
Well, you know, and even One Night, everybody knows a person, male or female, like One Night. She's very hard edged, but when it comes to her family or her friends, and in her case, her friends are her family.
Yeah,
she's gonna call it square. She's gonna call it down the middle.
But boy, you did say it when you were talking about characterization. I've been listening to a lot of people talking about genre films lately, and it's all about what the pacing is like, you know, how many boom booms there are, and it's like, you know what? None of that matters. What really matters to me is the characters. That's where the real story is. If I don't care about these people, I don't care about the story. You know, and these characters are people I did care about.
Well, and you know, that's one of the great things about Cameron. He may not be the best writer in the world, but he's not terrible, and he knows how to bring in other writers to help beef up his scripts and beat up his stories.
Yeah.
And what you have with The Abyss is, and you hit upon it very perfectly, Troy, these are blue collar types.
Yep.
Now, granted, they do have military personnel that comes in to aid them because, well, you have, in this particular instance,
it's a military situation, yeah.
You have to have the military on board. They have to be there because it's a downed U.S.
nuclear
submarine. Yeah, essentially. This scenario reminds me just a little bit of it was like a TV movie with David Carradine and I think Charlton Heston called Gray Lady Down. I don't know if you ever heard of it or if you ever saw it.
I don't think so.
It deals with a similar situation where they have a submarine that has gotten trapped in a trench, much like this one, except it's buried, but the crew is still alive. But they're fighting against the clock to try and dig the ship out and dig out the sub without damaging the sub at the same time. Wow. And they do eventually succeed, but there's a lot of tension there.
Sure.
And with The Abyss, the situation is similar, except in this instance, we know the crew's all dead. I will say the actors that they got to play the military officers, and of course, being it's a James Cameron film, it was the 80s. Yeah. Michael Biehn as Lieutenant Coffee, the one that goes buggo, as they say so perfectly in the movie. When Lindsay is giving the rundown about the I forget it's
narcosis, the nitrogen narcosis.
Yeah, where you start to have tremors in your hands, you get paranoid, and you just go completely buggo. And she said it perfectly.
Exactly.
And this doesn't seem like a guy that's necessarily evil or bad, but unfortunately, he's under a lot of stress, and not to mention he's dealing with this psychosis that's out of his control. And he might be tightly strung in a normal situation, but you don't see him necessarily doing anything that he would normally do, that he does in this movie.
Yeah.
And that for me is the interesting thing, because you almost want to dislike Coffee, but at the same time you pity him.
Yeah.
Because this is still at the height of the Cold War. They're trying to get the submarine secured and so on. And now you've got the added element of not only does this officer have this neurological issue that he normally wouldn't have, but on top of that, now you've got a first contact situation.
Right. So, and do you want the military to be, on the front lines of a first contact situation, let alone one that's, all strung out on I don't know if it was oxygen toxicity or nitrogen psychosis or what it is, but, yeah. That's not what we want our first contact to be.
Definitely not. We want more of a first contact like in Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly.
With a group of explorers that have diplomatic skills, not so much a highly strung Navy SEAL unit.
Right.
So, and it's just not the best environment, unfortunately, for the military.
Yeah.
And of course, we were talking about this before we got started. There's an alternate cut of this film that kind of puts even the aliens in a different light, where they're not necessarily malevolent, but they're much more interactive with the surface world and what's going on there, because, as it says during the film, there's tensions between the U.S. and between the USSR. Because at that time, the USSR still did exist.
And let's face it, every movie in that decade had some Cold War. If it wasn't directly about the Cold War, it made allusions to the Cold War.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you look at Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, which came out just a few years later, in the mid '90s, give or take.
Yeah.
Do
you think about Glasnost? Do you think about even to a certain extent Chernobyl with the whole Praxis incident?
Yes, absolutely. And before we go on, want to send a shout to the chat, two good friends of the channel, Ace Mowick and Jeff B. Gentlemen, good evening. And Ace, I hope you enjoy the concert, and behave yourself. Don't get too ratty. So. And Jeff B., always a pleasure, my friend. Good to see you. So,
keeping us safe from bots, I see, with the blue wrench.
Yes, Jeff. I have a very loyal, dedicated squad of mods for my channel, and Jeff brings up another great
Red October.
Great 90s Hunt for Red October. Yeah, totally, Jeff. Absolutely. I actually did that. I did a review of that a couple of years ago. And but the other aspect of this film, and you look at the title and it seems kind of one note, but it really isn't, because there's the very old adage.
It's the quote that is actually on the title card, or before the title card.
Mm-hmm. If you look into the abyss long enough, the abyss will look back into you.
Yep. Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, yep. Mm-hmm. So, and a new face to the chat, one I have not seen before, Castlier Garcia. Mr. Garcia, or Mrs. Garcia, it's good to see you. And yes, actually, thank you for bringing it up. Garcia, wow. Leviathan. Now that's one I've not watched in a while, but I actually know both of those films that you're talking about, Leviathan and Deep Star 6. I have to say, though, there's a bit more of a gore factor with Deep Star 6 than with Leviathan, but they're both along the same lines in terms of the genre. They're both deep sea monster flicks, and I love them both, but All opinions are welcome here. So, Castlear Garcia.
The only thing I remember about Leviathan is Amanda Pays. I mean, wow.
Well, the thing I remember about Leviathan is not so much her; it's Peter Weller.
Oh, sure. He was there too.
And
sorry.
Of course, what was her? What was her name from Deep Star 6? She played the Doctor.
See, I don't know that film.
Oh, I know that film well. It's been a while since I watched it. But there were some very attractive ladies in that film as well. And Dagon. Oof.
Oh, I've got a love-hate relationship with that movie. Let me tell you, Dagon. All these years, there's things I've loved about it, and then I struggle with the fact that, but this really isn't a pure H.P. Lovecraft story. They changed so much, but I still really like this movie, and I just got to separate the two in my mind and go, okay, this is just a very different story that they're telling here.
Yeah, Well, the great thing about Abyss is they don't make the aliens frightening or fearsome, but to any extent, but they do make them imposing in terms of the technology.
Yeah.
That's how we know how far advanced they are. Not to mention, as I said before, in the extended cut of this film, we see that the aliens have these massive walls of water along the coastlines of just about everywhere in the world. And you're thinking, geez, these guys do not screw around.
Right.
But when you see them, they're very delicate, very petite, and you're thinking, a being like that looks like that, but can do what they do, that's frightening.
When you really think through what their technology has to be like, they are able to control gravity, density, mass, and I guess if you take that to its logical sci-fi conclusion, well, yes, that would be necessary for, transstellar, possibly transgalactic travel. But then how is that used when they're not like traveling through space, right? What impact would that have on daily life for them? And what could that be used for? And there was one, I tend to like to pick apart movies, and it's like, oh, well, that couldn't really happen or something. And one of the things that bothered me was with all of the technical details that they got right throughout this movie. There's, the scene where Bud is rescued, and I'm like, well, he didn't decompress. Why doesn't, his eyes just start bleeding, and go into the bends and just, die? And then literally 5 minutes later, Lindsay is saying, as they come out of the base that they were in, she's like, why aren't we dead? We never decompressed. Wow, these aliens are, amazing, or something like that. And just with one line, just totally addressed exactly what I was thinking. And I'm like, there is not enough movies that think through. I tend to think of it as like troubleshooting. Here, read my script. Does anything stand out to you? Nanette did this actually once for an author friend of ours. She was reading it, and she's like, oh, this is really good, except in chapter 3, you specified that the character was wearing loafers, and later on you have him bend over to tie them. He's like, oh, okay, yeah. And then he went back and revised. These little details, that's what editing is for. And just to have something like that, I'm like, okay, that wasn't a mistake. He actually had thought this through. That is some good writing.
Yeah. And shout to the chat also, Fook Norris. Fook, it's good to see you, bud. And Fook brings up a good one, and something that you just mentioned, where they do address the whole matter of decompression. You actually see the characters decompress And I think there's a portion of the film at the end where they're having to decompress and they're all having to figure out. That might be another one that I do down the road, because that's another great character-driven or actor-driven story, because you've got a really great cast. You've got Sharon Stone. You've got you've got Samuel L. Jackson. You've of course got Dustin Hoffman. You got Liv Schreiber. You've got Peter Coyote, and yeah, great cast and everything. But going down the cast list on this movie, there's three main leads. Obviously, we mentioned them already. That's of course Ed Harris, Mary Elizabeth Esther-Antonio, and Michael Biehn. But the supporting cast was actually just as good. I mean,
a lot of great character actors there.
Yes, the guy who played Catfish, who's like, you know what they used to call this? They called this thunder. And you're like,
yep,
you believe, and he gets to show it off because he cold cocks Lieutenant Coffee.
Yep. Yeah, that's Leo Burmester. He is a character actor. Yeah, good stuff.
So, but the interesting thing was, as many movies that came out before this that dealt with the whole underwater monster or creature as type of storyline, I think this movie did the best job of. I think it had the best story. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
Not to say that any of the other ones aren't without merit. I mean, who doesn't like a good monster movie? Everybody does. But this one had an added element, and it really, as we started to say before, when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. And if you really look at the dynamic of Ed Harris and his character and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio's character, they're really having to come to terms with their relationship.
Yeah.
And that for me was one of the strong points of the film. So, Troy, your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out is that this film, it didn't even have to be a sci-fi monster film, right? I mean, that was almost incidental. The addition of the aliens didn't even need to be there, right? I mean, it could have just as easily been an Irwin Allen style film that was literally about a rescue of some people in a sub or whatever it was, because that really was where the focus was. It was on the characters and on a natural kind of action. It was like, I almost felt like there being aliens was just kind of thrown in there for 80s studio pleasing. But yeah, I also think you did mention that there was a bunch of other films that came out right around this time that were, like you said, underwater films. And I think part of that was because of the struggle that The Abyss went through to get made. It was very behind schedule. It was very over budget. And as they were struggling to get this thing out, there were other studios going, hey, we got to beat them to the punch. And they put out their underwater movies. And they didn't do nearly as well. So it was like the studio was starting to get a little squirrely and worried that The Abyss was going to be a flop because people had already demonstrated they weren't interested in these underwater movies. And I think Cameron instead comes along and says, don't think of it as an underwater. He didn't say this. I'm just paraphrasing what I imagine him, feeling. Don't worry about it being an underwater movie. It's just a good movie with good characters. People will respond to that. And I think people did. I think people also especially responded to the technical innovations that came out of it. But you're right, it didn't do quite as well as some of his other films, like Terminator 2 right after it,
Or even True Lies.
Oh, True Lies. Oh, I love that one. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That for me, that's one of my top 10 90s films, because it's Cameron doing just a pure action comedy type of film. Because you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has good comedic timing if he's playing off someone good. In this instance, they had somebody good for him to play off, and that was, of course, Tom Arnold. And you of course had Jamie Lee Curtis. You had Eliza Dushku,
very young.
Role. Very young. This was actually, I think, her first major starring role.
Yeah.
But for Cameron, well, let me say this: in terms of the movie, the story itself was interesting, yes, but people went to see what Cameron was going to do next.
Yeah,
because he had worked with Stan Winston on Terminator, and that movie itself. Now, the story itself and so on is so iconic, but it also pushed the boundaries of stop motion animation. It's pushed the boundaries of prosthetic makeup and so on. People wanted to know what Cameron was going to do next, and that was one of the big draws and everything when I was doing my research for this film, for the review, and looking back through all the archival footage and everything else. A lot of people were saying we want to see what Cameron was going to do next. And that was the big thing. That was the big draw, really, because Cameron's name alone, that was a draw. I mean, granted, he only had one big successful movie at the time, but Terminator was very sound.
Yep.
And this movie kind of just solidified Cameron as a innovator when it came to special effects technology, and not to mention also camera technology.
Yeah, and I mean, you even mentioned, Terminator. I don't know if you've done a stream on Terminator already, but
it's been
Cameron.
A while, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There was a scene that they needed to do towards the end of that movie, and it involved like breaking into a car or something and stealing the car and stuff. And he didn't have, it wasn't in his budget. He didn't have what's it called? You have to have a permit to film at a certain place. He didn't have any of that. So he was literally going rogue to get this scene filmed. And I think that was the first time, because this wasn't obviously public knowledge at the time. We didn't have all the DVD extras we do now. We didn't have DVDs back then. But the industry was starting to see him as someone who he'll go to just about any lengths to get his movie made. And, like I said, he went over budget and he had no budget. So he literally was doing pickup scenes on his own time and getting people to volunteer to do it. My understanding was that in the overrun on this film, on The Abyss, he ended up sacrificing a big part of his own salary to get, certain things done and completed.
Well, yeah, and, for a up-and-coming director, because this was his second big feature after Terminator, really.
Yep.
That was a big risk for him. And not to mention, he wasn't like super financially successful, but he went out there and he took the risks. And that is something that I think we all deeply admire about James Cameron as a director, as a storyteller, and as somebody who has pushed the boundaries of technology for cinema, for movie making. And the big thing was the water tentacle. He didn't know how they were going to pull it off. He didn't know who to go to, and then he was like, let's go to ILM. Let's go to Industrial Light Magic. Let's go to George's. Let's go to Lucas's neighborhood and see what they can pull off. And
to his credit, he this is another thing. If you're going to be a director like this, you have to have good leadership skills, and part of being a good leader is having backup plans. He already had an idea what to do if that scene didn't work. he would have had to rejigger some scenes in the story, but he already had it in the back of his mind just in case. That is good. It's not really responsible to make a leap of faith and go, I don't know what happens if this doesn't work out, you know?
Well, and you hit upon a good point, Troy. Cameron, while he always was looking forward, he was also, as you said, very responsible. He wanted to do right by his crew and by the cast.
Yeah.
And do right by the story that he was trying to tell. And it does take a lot of delegation. It does take a lot of strong leadership to do a major production like this. And like I had mentioned, this was only his second big feature that was being released. I can't remember which studio released The Abyss, but they even were taking risks. They were banking just on Cameron's name alone.
Yeah,
but they were willing. But that was the interesting thing about the '80s, and the Abyss is a great. Well, there are a lot of films and everything that kind of fit into this niche that were risks for the studio, but the studio had enough faith, enough confidence in the creative to give it a chance. And by any rights, this movie probably should have. I mean, granted, it wasn't a huge rousing success, but it was successful enough that Cameron's would continue to work, and he's continued to work to this day. I mean, he's working on parts 2 and 3 of Avatar, for heaven's sakes, and he's pushing the boundaries of movie making technology in those films.
Yeah,
heaven only knows what we're going to see in that.
Yep.
And apparently, I think Avatar 2 is supposed to take primarily underwater. So he's kind of going back to what he loves most, and that's the sea.
Yep. And but I'll tell you something. You said something about willing to do whatever it takes. He really did push this crew, but no one can make the argument that he wasn't willing to do everything he expected of them. He almost died making this movie.
Yep.
Did you know that? There was an incident where he went down and was doing some, I don't remember if he was overseeing a filming or getting something ready or whatever, and he didn't have enough air in his tank, and he had to come up quickly, and somebody came over to help him out, and unfortunately the regulator they were trying to use for him was broken, and it was actually drowning him instead of giving him air. It was a real bad scenario, but no one can say that he just kind of sat up on a chair and told people do this, do that. No, he got in there and did it himself.
Yeah. Well, and that is the great thing about Cameron as a director. He's more hands-on than a lot of directors nowadays, or even during his time when he was really super active. And it's a testament to his dedication as a storyteller and as a director that he put his own, as you said, he put his own life on the line for this. So,
yep.
And just real quick, I want to say hello to the chat. Dandelion Fluff, Dandelion, my dear, it is good to see you, and thank you for popping by this evening. And Castellar Garcia, you're popping a lot of interesting movies I've never actually ever heard of, but I'm going to have to write these all down once we get done with the stream because I'm actually somewhat intrigued and everything. So, Castellar, thank you, and thank you and everybody in the chat. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your participation as always. So,
sometimes those obscure movies can be really,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a gamble. They could suck, but they could also be really, really good gems that you'd never have heard of before.
That's true. Very, very true. Well, and here's the thing. When you think about James Cameron's work as a director, as a storyteller, what are the movies that first come to mind? obviously Terminator, obviously Titanic, True Lies, Avatar, most definitely. Abyss kind of slips through the cracks there, but there's a lot of good in that film, and we all. The one thing I wanted to touch on during our discussion tonight was the whole relationship between Lindsay and Bud Brakeman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because either we have known a couple that's been in the situation like they're in, or we've been in a situation like that ourselves, where either one or the other party is on the outs, but the other party is still invested.
Yeah.
And I think their relationship, their dynamic during this film, and how they were very cold and very distant at the start of the film, which any estranged couple is going to be. But you can tell that Bud is still invested. And Lindsay is too, but she just doesn't want to admit it.
Right. And it really does require this shared adventure, shared danger, and it does tend to put things in perspective, right? What's really important. And it's, let's face it, it's that relationship that in the denouement of the story is what really saves humanity, right? But not in a cheesy way. If you really look at it, it's like, this is the shining light, right? The candle in the darkness. It's not all bad. Here's an example to base hope on. If these two can get their stuff together and find a purpose, right? Find that love for each other. I mean, literally, they're both literally prepared to sacrifice their lives for each other, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, she basically is like, look, I'm going to drown myself. And let's hope that you're able to bring me back. But, this way you get out and at least one of us survives. And literally he does the same thing when he goes to defuse the bomb. He's literally sacrificing himself for everyone else,
Yeah. Well, this movie does really exemplify the whole concept of self-sacrifice in a big way.
Yeah.
Because even the crew of Deep Core, granted, we don't get to know everybody, but you do get a very strong sense that this is a tightly knit crew. You could even make the argument this is a very tightly knit family unit, although a very unorthodox one.
Yeah.
And when you have outsiders come into their home and they're very protective of it, and you see how Lindsay reacts when Bud agrees to the military's request, and the corporation that does own the deep sea drilling rig, she's pissed. Mm-hmm. She's like, "You got sold. You got bought out cheap." And she calls him. I to this day, I'm like, this has got to be one of the lamest, but at the same time, one of the most powerful insults ever. She calls Bud a wiener. Of all the things she could call him,
yeah,
she calls him something that almost benign, but at the same time, she's like, I'm gonna make you feel this.
Yeah. And again, talk about being able to relate to these characters. I think anyone who's ever been in a job for a long period of time, a job that you really enjoy and you like your coworkers, right? You build those relationships. And I think what really did it, this is a scene that I think a lot of people would say was unnecessary and maybe even a little cheesy, but it's the scene where one night is, she's piloting the thing, she's got the song on and she starts to sing with it, and then everyone else is singing with her, including, Bud. I mean, and Bud is like, Mr. Hard-Nosed, right? But It's
Yep.
like they're all totally getting into this. They even sounded pretty good together. And I'm like,
Yeah, they did.
I can totally relate to that. I get what's happening here, you know? And no, that is a scene that needed to be there. You could never cut that scene. It would not be the same movie. These would not be the same characters.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say this. Bud does, and I say this in the best possible way, just in case this does reach his ears. Bud does remind me very fondly of my father-in-law.
Oh.
He's a mechanic. He's a record driver. Well, he was a record driver. He's done big redrive and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Bud does remind me of him to a degree. Bud even reminds me of my late maternal grandfather, who I'm named after, actually. And he was a tow truck driver. He was a big rig driver. He drove the trucks that hauled the oil field equipment out into the field. So it's seeing Bud, I see a slight reflection of two men. One who's no longer with us, has been long since passed, but one that is very much still with us, and both kind of fit Bud's build. And he's a complex man, but at the same time, he's a very simplistic man. He loves his wife, even though they're estranged. Yeah. And there's that scene where they get into an argument, and they get into a name calling bout. And he gets pissed, and he gets up, and he storms into the head, and he takes off his wedding ring, and throws it down the chemical toilet.
Yep.
And throughout the rest of the movie, that one hand is blue.
Yep.
And you're like, that's when he goes to fish, he's like, damn it, I can't do it.
Yep.
I've got to go fish out my wedding ring. So
again, talk about a payoff in the story, right? Later on, when his hand gets caught, as the door's closing and he's holding that open, he's going to die if they can't get that door open. Why isn't his finger crushed? It was the ring that saved him.
It was a heavy gauge wedding ring, yeah. And it's appropriate that would be some sort of heavy gauge metal because
of the job he works in, yeah.
Exactly, because Lindsay understood what he had to do for a living.
Yep.
And granted, you never see her with her wedding ring, but you get the impression that maybe it's squirreled away somewhere, just in case. Yeah. Because I don't ever remember seeing her wedding ring on her finger, but Bud still wears his because he's still invested in the marriage, even if she isn't, and even if they're on the outs.
Yeah. And now, this is not where the story goes, but I could imagine that if the story didn't go the way, with the adventure and the life and death and whatnot, and they had gone on and gone through the divorce, I almost picture Bud years later still wearing that ring, like, if I don't find someone else, I'm not taking this ring off, just that's how I picture it. But good on them. That's not the way it went. They ended up getting their stuff together.
Yeah, they
you kind of root for them. You kind of root for them, and that's not really meant to be what the movie's about. It's really supposed to be about this Cold War situation, the aliens, the bomb, and all that. But what you're really invested in is their relationship.
Well, that's as I said before, it's a testament to Cameron's ability to tell a good story. Yeah. I mean, if you even look at one of the most profitable films in the history of cinema, not to mention one of James Cameron's most profitable films, period, Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
We all know the story of Titanic, but what's the part of the movie that we often key to? Jack and Rose and Cal Hockley, played by one of my all-time favorite actors, Billy Zane.
Yeah,
you gotta love Billy Zane in that movie. He plays a quintessential cheesy, over the top bad guy. But you love to hate him. So honestly, with the Abyss, yeah, all the other elements of the story are there. But as you said, Troy, what's the part we key to? The personal story.
Yep.
And even Hippie with that damn rat.
Yeah.
That damn rat causes more trouble and gets more people almost killed than any other rat in the history of cinema.
I remember Netter when we were watching it. She didn't think much of the rat until the explanation of the breathing unit, and she's like, I would have punched that guy in the face. I don't care that it worked. That's my rat. And I'm like, yep, another example of, keying in on the characters and what they care about, right?
Yeah. Well, and Hippie is the quintessential conspiracy theory alien theorist of the bunch.
Which is great because he was right.
Yeah. And he's like, UFOs. Well, heck, that works too. Underwater flying objects. So
there you go.
And Jeff B, you need to watch that movie at least once, dude. What the hell? Good grief. And Cass, yes.
I never saw that movie. I knew the ending. The boat sinks.
Castellar Garcia, one of two of my all-time favorite movies. Demon Knight. The Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight. Now, The Phantom I've never actually watched.
Oh, The Phantom is great. The Phantom is great.
It's really cheesy. I do know the basic premise of it. It's actually based on an old 1930s or 40s comic book, kind of in the same vein as The Shadow, another favorite movie of mine that I did a review.
Think Shadow or even Zorro to some degree. Yeah.
Or even The Green Hornet.
Sure.
So,
but you know what, Jeff, but that whole ending thing, that is my exact example for whenever someone gets upset about spoilers. You know what? It's not the destination, it's the journey. You can't spoil a movie for me. It will never spoil a movie if it's a movie worth seeing. I can see Titanic knowing the boat's going to sink. I can see Passion of the Christ knowing that the guy's going to get nailed to a tree. Okay, I know how movies end. That doesn't make them any less great films,
Yeah. Well, and I try not to do spoilers if I'm doing a newer movie, but if it's an older movie, I'm going to be like, get off your ass and go watch this damn movie.
Yeah.
This is a movie you should watch at least once in your life.
Well, and it comes down to some of these classic films that are, decades old. You just almost assume that everyone has already seen it because, things like, for example, Planet of the Apes, right? The big twist ending at the end of Planet of the Apes. That is such a big part of our cultural psyche. It's like even people that haven't seen the movie know it. That's iconic.
Yeah, exactly. When you see Charlton
Soylent Green is people. That's another one.
Oh yeah, that's that. I have seen bits and pieces of Soylent Green, but I've never actually had a chance to sit down and watch it all the way through. Now, with Planet of the Apes, oh yeah, I've watched that sucker from start to finish. And I will say this, and I may, when I get around to doing my when I started my Ultra Retro review series, I will be doing the Planet of the Apes series from start to finish, from Planet of the Apes to Battle 4.
Nice,
because I know that the production value of the films does go down, but the movies themselves are still very strong. And that's because of the acting, because of the actors, because of the cast and everything, and because of the direction and the writing. That, for me, is why I love these older films.
Yeah.
And
I love And if you can find a way to squeeze me in there somewhere, I would love it, because
I'll put you on the list.
Planet of the Apes was a 70s. I mean, it was like Star Wars before there was Star Wars. I mean, Mego was putting, Mego was putting out the action figures. They had all the licenses and all the toys.
Yep.
There was that cartoon series on TV, which my co-host on Sunday nights, Aged Boomer, he bought that for me for my birthday. He's pretty awesome that way.
Nice.
And so I was able to take that off my Amazon list. But so yeah.
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about with the. Well, Jeff B, here's the thing. I've seen bits and pieces of Soylent Green enough to know the basic gist of the movie. You've never even seen Titanic.
Right. That's fair. That's fair. I'll tell you what, Soylent Green is probably one that's worth revisiting these days, because as you look at the world, the things that are going on around us, we need to revisit movies like Soylent Green and,
1984.
1984. I'm actually, next Friday, I'm doing a rewatch of Demolition Man. That's another one that's very, very
Troy,
poignant. Mm-hmm.
If you would not mind, I don't want to be imposing, but
would you be available?
What night will it be?
Friday night, 9:00 Central.
Damn it! I have to work the next day. Son of a gun!
I know.
I'll catch the replay. Okay.
Okay.
I absolutely love Demolition Man. I do. I love that film to death. It is.
And chances are, in the next couple weeks after, I'll probably also be doing Idiocracy.
Another one I've never had a chance to watch, but I've known. Like
Demolition Man, it was meant to be satirical and cautionary tale, and unfortunately, it seems our society has turned it into a how-to.
Indeed. And Kessler, Enemy Mine, that's another great one. Thank you,
love
Kessler.
that movie. Oh my gosh, I haven't watched that in years.
Same here. It's actually on I want to say it's on HBO Max. Maybe.
Is it?
Maybe. I'll have to double check. But and Kessler, that is one I did a watch party for back.
It's on Hulu and Sling.
Okay. All right. Enemy Mine is okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually just may go find a copy of it secondhand. So,
exactly. I one of the things I'm always saying on my channel, it's become almost a catchphrase for me: own physical media, because with so many different versions coming out and the streaming services, you can't own all of the streaming services, and even if you, in quotes, buy it and it's on your whatever, they can take that away from you at any time or decide something's problematic and change it or whatever. Own physical media offline so that you can watch it however, whenever you want to.
Exactly, and I agree. And Netter, that's a great quote from Demolition Man. One minute I'm driving along, next thing I know, my car turns
into a cannoli. And I gotta admit, when I saw it, I'm like, that is actually brilliant. Why haven't they come up with that? But
we're getting close to the self-driving car.
Right, I meant the foam, but yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, totally. But talking about special effects, with self-driving car and the secure foam.
Yeah.
The model work for this movie, it was impressive. I mean, you've of course got the well, I'm going to use a term that they use for the Lord of the Rings, the bigature of the USS Montana.
Oh yeah.
Now, granted, it doesn't have to be super detailed, but when they're doing the bigger sections of the ship or with the smaller submersibles going along the hull, and you've got those smaller submersibles, and of course you've got those little bitty figures on top. They're supposed to be the crew members and the guys from the Navy SEALs, and you're like, damn, they made that look good.
Well, my understanding, and this might just be another Cameron, thing, that when they did Titanic, they built like a 1/6 scale Titanic. And there was actually some guy that was doing still photographs of it, and he posed G.I. Joes on the deck.
Why does that not surprise me?
If I was working with a 1/6 scale anything, you better darn believe I'd pull out my old G.I. Joes.
Why does that not surprise me? And the practical use for G.I. Joes to boot.
Yep. And you better believe that Joe and Barbie would be in the captain's suite, no doubt about it. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a different stream.
Oh.
Never mind.
Oh, no. Hey, Troy, you're good. You're good, bud. My streams are not meant for small children. They're meant for adults who want to have a good conversation and sometimes will often have a good time. So
yeah, in my house, Barbie went for Joe, not for Ken.
Yeah, because Ken was, well, he wasn't packing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
To quote one of my all-time favorite movies, and I have a lot of these, and you're going to be like, okay, how many movies does the ambassador like? I like a lot of movies.
Oh, me too. We have over 600 DVDs. We have a heck of a library.
To quote the late great Alan Rickman, I'm as anatomically impaired as a Ken doll.
Oh, wow.
If you can name the movie, you get a gold star and a cookie.
I don't know. Netter knows Alan Rickman better than I do.
I'll give you a gimme this time. Dogma.
Oh, I never saw that. He plays an angel in that, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm actually in a few weeks. Me and a buddy, we're going to start reviewing all of the Jay and Silent Bob films.
Fair.
He's a kid in the 90s. I was in the 90s, and it's Kevin Smith, and regardless of what you may think.
Kevin Smith used to be great, yeah.
I still say he's done good stuff. I say this as a kid, as I meant at the start of the stream tonight. As a kid in the 80s, I liked Masters of the Universe, but I recognized what the cartoon was. It was commercial. Yeah. In terms of the Netflix series, I enjoyed the Netflix series. I thought it was actually really good. So, and Jeff B, you know Dogma, but you don't know Titanic. Dude, what the hell? Blow dry. Oh, good grief, Castellar. That's a good one. Zorro, the gateway to stir.
Blow dry. That was the one I was trying to think of that Netta really liked with Alan Rickman, yeah.
Oh, man.
Stir Crazy. Great movie.
Yes. But, kind of with the, with the special effects for this film, especially... they could, that when the alien ship or city ship rises up out of the water, that thing could have looked as cheesy as all hell.
Yeah.
But it still looked cool.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I get the feeling that the people who did Stargate Atlantis borrowed some inspiration from that model, and maybe even the people who did Star Trek Deep Space Nine borrowed some inspiration for the design of the station Deep Space Nine from the alien city ship for the Abyss. So, and of course, you've got those really great illuminated submersibles, and of course, the design of the aliens themselves, and you're like, this is so... how did they do this? And you're like, especially the one shot of where Lindsay is touching the hull of one of those alien submersibles, and just ripples, and light just plays off of her fingers, and it looks like Like when you put your hand on one of those snake ball or lightning bolt doodads, if you know what I'm talking about, Troy.
Right. It's got the Tesla thing going on inside it. Yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's got the diode in the middle or the electrode in the middle, and it's just a big glass ball around it, essentially.
Right.
That's how I kind of envision. That's kind of how I compared the effect of her running her hand along the surface of the alien submersible or a submarine or whatever you want to call it. And I'll say this: I even think George Lucas brought some inspiration for the design of the Naboo, or not the Gungan submersible that.
Sure.
Because that's very yes.
Oh, Galaxy Quest, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm only 20 away from 500. As soon as we hit 500, I will be doing my watch along for Galaxy Quest, because that's one I told a lot of people when we hit 500. I'm going to watch Brave for Galaxy Quest. And shout out to the chat, my fellow ambassador, a good friend of the channel, Mr. Zach Leary. Zach, is good to see you. And we've touched on that a little bit. Also, the first full CJ character, the large, And I appreciate you stopping by tonight, and hope you're having a good weekend. And, you gotta, so be safe and try not to run yourself too crazy. So. Oh no, Jeff, we never go off the rail here. What are you talking about? We never ever. No, the hint of sarcasm in my voice. We always make up the rails, but we still get back on to the rails again at some point. But oh, mercy! And well, you don't start the people. And motorist man, I think it's anybody appreciate something. Let's see, Kessler gets over streak. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll eventually be doing another one of my favorite airs and hit performances down the road. But the classic, you got Ed Harris, Cage, and you got, well, sadly, John Connery. Are you having any trouble hearing me?
You're doing a little bit of roboting on my end. I thought it might have just been my connection.
Okay, let me pop out and come back in. Of course, my is. Let's see what's my computer is. So that might having. Let me pop out and I'll come back in just a minute. So hang on, guys. You back.
No, but I have to admit, Ed Harris really is a badass actor, and underrated. I think that a lot of people realize that. And getting back to his time on The Abyss, I heard some behind the scenes talk that he was doing, and he struck. Well, everybody on this set, all these the cast and crew, kind of went through hell here, but Ed Harris really held himself to a very, very high standard, and there was just some things about it. I guess there's a story that he told in an interview that on his way back after a night of filming, he was just so upset that a scene didn't turn out the way it should have, and it was not really his fault. It was partly because of the technical problems, the underwater, the not being able to breathe, and so forth. And he just was beating himself up so much for it that he literally had to pull over his car and stopped because he was having an anxiety attack, and he was just literally in tears about it. I think that he took way too much on himself. I think a lot of people, should probably have put a lot more of the blame on Cameron, but consummate professional, he held himself to a very, very high standard, and that's that's Harris for you, and I think a lot of people realize how good he really is.
Oh yes, absolutely. Am I saying
much better? Much
Okay.
better. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Excellent. So, yeah, honestly, Ed Harris, up until this movie, I had never really heard of him at all. I'll be blunt, and I think this movie really started his career off in a big way. And obviously, he's done a lot of films, but I think he's best known for this role, but also for his role, like I said, in The Rock. I mean, what was the name of the Colonel Trammell, something like that. And if you don't believe him in this role as Bud Brigman or Virgil,
Yeah.
as his proper name, this movie could sink. And
Right.
it's a testament to Cameron's ability to get the right actors for the roles that he wants for his movie. Obviously, he had worked with Michael Biehn before on Terminator, so obviously Bihn's going to get put in this film. And Michael Biehn in this film as Coffee, he did a good job. I mean, he played the straight-laced military officer well, but he also played the deranged military officer once he succumbed to the deep sea pressure. So, and Ed Harris, he's very warm, he's very human, he's also very funny.
Yeah.
And you really see all those aspects of his ability to carry off a performance like this in this movie because, and not to put too fine a point on this, his character's given name, Virgil, I think is not a too unintentional nod to Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, very possibly.
Well, because if you think about it, Dante has to, Virgil is the guide for Dante as he goes through the Inferno, who goes through Purgatory, and then eventually, no, he doesn't go to heaven. But if you look at the concept of going down into the depths of the world to find yourself.
Yeah.
This is true for everybody, but Virgil especially.
Yeah.
Because as the further deep he goes down into the sea, into the abyss, he finds himself, his wife rediscovers herself, and the crew even... I think you don't see it as much, but I think even the crew kind of go through a transformation as well. And shout to the chat, Jeff B. You have a good night too, buddy. And we'll save you a spot at the banquet table once we've taken out all the knights. And the man with 6 fingers on one hand. Save you a seat right next to Inigo Montoya. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
That's another great movie. Very quotable movie, too.
Oh.
Very memeable movie.
Yeah, but very heartfelt, very genuine, but very funny.
Yeah.
And very, very 80s movie because it is so completely and utterly unconventional.
Yes.
I mean, you've got a very unconventional cast. I mean, you got Carrie Yules, you've got Robin Wright, You've got Andre the Giant.
Yep.
You've got Mandy Patinkin. You've got Peter Falk. You've got Fred Savage. What was the name of the little guy? Played Vasily. Wallace Shaw.
Oh, the Grand Nagus.
Yes, Wallace Shaw. Yes, from Deep Space Nine. Castellier, I've heard of that movie. Isn't Viggo Mortensen in that movie too? I think. Oh, yeah, Milk Money. I remember that one too. I've never seen Needful Things, but I am aware of a Castellier. So,
I do have to say though that when we're talking about Ed Harris, for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but before The Abyss, the only thing I knew him from was The Right Stuff. He played John Glenn. And so right. I saw this as a perfect fit for him. I kind of saw him in a very similar way in this movie, so I was like, yeah, I can buy this. Sure.
Well, yeah, and if you even look at the suit that he wears in the movie, or at the end of the movie when he makes the deep dive, it is very reminiscent of an astronaut suit.
Sure.
Except in this instance, it's not him going into outer space, but it's him going
in more inner space.
Well, yeah, inner space, and also going into the depths of the Earth, which is even as mysterious as going into outer space itself, because there's so much about the ocean that we still don't know.
Yeah.
And I will quote, I think, a movie we both have a deep fondness for. They say the ocean is cold, but the ocean contains the hottest blood of all. Whales weep not. Star Trek 4.
Yep. Great movie. Captain,
Iconic.
There be whales here.
Yeah. There be whales here. And then, of course, we got Star Trek 5. Although, I have... Go ahead.
Not. Maybe it's because of what we've gotten since then. I think that movie's aged better than it had any right to. Because looking back on it, it wasn't that terrible. It wasn't that great, but it wasn't that terrible.
Well, the thing is, for me, it holds a special place in my heart. Because it was the first Trek film I got to see in theaters.
Oh, okay.
So, for me, at the time, I didn't dislike it, and even nowadays, I don't necessarily dislike it. I mean, all Trek, at least classic Trek, to me, is good.
Yeah.
And as cringeworthy as Star Trek 5 is, at the same time, it does have its strong points. It does have its strengths. And it does have its very genuinely funny moments. Please, sir. Not in front of the Klingons.
Right. Exactly.
And honestly, in terms of the Abyss, you could almost look at the crew of the Deep Core rig as a blue collar crew for the Enterprise.
I could see that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially, there's that bit early on when the military's coming to them and asking for their help. And, Ed Harris is like, I speak for my crew. There's me and there's God. And I'm like, yeah, that's a captain kind of way of looking at his crew,
Absolutely. I mean, and that's another added dimension of Virgil Bud Rigman's character. Yes, he's a very hard-nosed guy, but he cares about his crew. And that's an awesome thing to see. Dealing with the rigors of command is not always an easy thing. And to see him not only deal with being a mechanic, being the leader of this crew, and dealing with his own personal stuff as well. It's not easy.
Yep. But you know what? I think, again, that's another aspect that everybody that has worked, the whole workaday job, the blue-collar thing, knows, right? That's life. That's life for 99% of us in the world.
Yeah.
So absolutely relatable.
Well, and, you bring that up, and, this movie is a great example of the rather ordinary coming in contact with the extraordinary. And regular, ordinary, working 9-to-5, hard labor type of jobs coming in contact with alien or extraterrestrial life. That's, for these people, is probably the highlight of their life. Hey, I was there when we made contact with extraterrestrials. Granted, it was underwater and not in outer space. But still, when you have a clash like this, I don't use the term clash in a negative way, but when you have such a stark clash of rather, I don't want to say low class people, because they're not necessarily low class. They have integrity. They're good people. They seem to be decent people. They're not by any means unethical. They're just trying to make a living, and you respect that. I mean, I work in a similar field myself, so them being the first people on Earth to encounter extraterrestrial life, particularly Bud himself being the first person on Earth to come in contact with extraterrestrials, and you see how he's just very he is himself. He doesn't put on any pretense. He doesn't act any other way. He doesn't act any differently.
And that's especially, I think you also have to keep that in the context of where he was at that moment, right? He was preparing for death. As far as he was concerned, these were his last breaths. These were his last thoughts. This was the end. After that experience, there is nothing that can happen that, is going to, he's been as humbled as he possibly can be. And anything after that is just gravy. So,
yeah.
But at the same time, I just had gotten through, and I hadn't drawn this correlation until just now. I had just gotten through saying he represents the 99% of us, right? What a great example then. This is what the aliens judge us by. This representation of humanity, not the leadership, which is the tiny, tiny percentage. The know-nothings that actually are in charge.
Yes.
But the general population, and here is a good example of the general population.
Exactly. And that's the great thing, because the most unlikeliest person in the world turns out to be the best emissary. No pun intended when I say this, the best ambassador for humanity. Because Virgil Brigman, he's not a man of great influence or power. He's not of the extremely learned or wise. He's just a good, decent, honest, hardworking man, trying to do right by everybody around him and trying to reconcile with his life.
I did want to,
Sure.
Netter just made me think of something with that comment. We went into this pointing out that these characters were not archetypes. They were not, they, just like so many of the other characters that Cameron has done in other things, like I said, aliens and so forth, they're people that anyone can relate to, but not, they don't fit in a little pigeonhole. But I do feel like movies that have come since then maybe do kind of draw some inspiration from them. And yeah, when she mentions the movie Twister, I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see some correlation in the relationship of the two main characters, right? Dissolving their marriage, going through a big adventure together, very dangerous. They end up coming back together at the end.
Yes.
Yeah, but I can't think of a lot of those before this. So
that's because there wasn't many, because cinema didn't really,
deal with divorce very often.
No,
before this.
Not really. I mean,
I think the first one that I can even think of was Kramer versus Kramer.
I've never actually seen it, but I am very well aware of the whole story arc of that film. The first film that I ever encountered that did deal with the divorce, and now it was in somewhat more of a dramatic / humorous way, was Mrs. Doubtfire. And that's of course one of Robin Williams' better known performances, and I'd say one of his best, because not so much as Euphegenia Doubtfire, but as Daniel Hillard. A guy who just wants to be with his kids, who's trying to do right by his family, trying to do right by himself, trying to reinvent himself in a lot of ways, trying to even grow up. I mean, I did a review for Mrs. Doubtfire a couple of years ago, and the thing that I said about, or one of the things, I don't think I ever actually said this, but if you look at the character of Euphegenia Doubtfire, she's sort of a cocoon, and Daniel goes through a transformation during his time as Euphegenia. He learns how to be a better father, even be a better man, if not to say a better husband. Yeah. But at least at the end, him and his wife are not at each other's throats. We don't know if they will ever get back together, but we do know that they are at least able to be civil with one another. And I think that was the most logical, and I think the best ending that you could possibly have. Now, the interesting thing about Mrs. Doubtfire, and then we'll get back to this here in a minute, is they actually shot an alternate ending where they get into one last big, huge argument. Daniel and Miranda do. And the kids are like, we hate you both. And they storm off upstairs, and he ends up leaving. And that's how the movie ends.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I that would not have gone over very well considering the tone of the movie.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, if you look at who directed that film, Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
He had done most of the movies in his repertoire on his resume were much more upbeat than that. So for him to do an ending like that was very risky. Now, I'm happy with the ending that we got for Mrs. Doubtfire. Yeah. I think it was the most logical ending. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't say that Daniel and Miranda do get back together, but again, they're at least able to be civil. They're able to have some sort of civil relationship,
which anyone who knows that kind of a family dynamic knows what a miracle that alone is. So
yes, exactly. And the good thing is Daniel does grow up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of switch back over to the Abyss. Bud is the one that's still invested, even though he denies it. But Lindsay is the one who's more resistant. She's still got the walls up. She's still throwing the occasional barb at Bud. But, it's when he finally goes on the dive. And you see them turn the corner, really, when everything goes to hell. And after the crane crashes into the station, and they're in another compartment in the rig, and he's asleep, and he's snoring, and she's like, Virgil, turn over on your side. And you're like,
and it's just so natural because they've been together for so long, you know?
Exactly. And, you know, that right there for me is, I think, when they really when she turned the corner in terms of how when she finally started to realize, I still love him.
Yeah.
I still care about him. Even though we had our issues in the past, I still love him. And then, of course, the great that great scene when he's several miles down and she finally breaks down.
Yeah.
And she's like, I hate the fact that I have to tell you this. I can't tell you this to your face, but when we're separated by 10,000 feet of water.
Yeah.
I still love you and I still need you.
Yeah, this was something that the story and the plot and the special effects and none of that matters when you look at the performances that I mean, all of them were great, but I just mean specifically Ed Harris, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, right? Those two just I'm just speechless, right? I mean, you that her emoting, you know, and think about it too from the point of view of an actor. You know, I don't know where Ed Harris was during the filming of that scene. He wasn't, you know, in a tank at the time. You know, he was off stage somewhere, maybe, or maybe he wasn't even on set at the time. And she's talking to a box, you know, and she's emoting and she's making us all feel all the feels, you know?
Yes.
And, gosh, even when, you know, they're trapped and she comes up with the idea of I drown, you drag me back and everything. Now, I know that scene she almost really, in real life, did almost drown. And it was a really bad circumstance. And, you know, but boy, she used it and she got that scene. And, you know, I mean, you're just, you know, imagining. She makes you feel like you're drowning. That's really what an actor, you know, does if they're doing their job the best that can be done, is they draw you into it and make you feel it. You don't just see it and experience it vicariously. It becomes visceral.
Yes. I honestly, Troy, could not agree more, because that's the actor's job, is to make us empathize and feel with the character that they are portraying, whether it's a real person or a fictionalized individual. And for her to be able to do that whole monologue and then have that emotional breakdown.
Yeah.
Where she and like you said, she's probably acting to a box.
Yeah.
And another great scene where somebody's acting to a golf ball,
right?
As of course from a Benchmark film, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Sure.
Sir Ian McKellen as Gandalf the Grey. He gives that very powerful, rousing speech, and he's doing it to a damn golf ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of all things.
That's exactly right. Although I have, you know, these kinds of stories where you have someone on the other end of a phone and stuff like that. I have heard of a lot of actors that have said, you know, in the behind the scenes and whatnot. Yeah, I was actually on set in another location. They even rigged it up so we could actually talk on the phone, so it could be as realistic for her as possible. I wasn't even supposed to be on scene at the time, but I went in and did my lines just to help her out or whatever. You know, I can't even remember what movie it was that I saw that was the case, but I'm like, you know, that's awesome, because anything you can do to make it as real as possible. One other thing I did want to say too, in that drowning scene, she has this moment where she holds him and she's, I can't. and then once her head is under, she kisses his faceplate, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's foreshadowing of what he's going to be doing later when he says it was always a one-way trip. You know, she's kissing him goodbye because she knows she may not. You know, she's got this plan where I could come back, but knowing full well in all likelihood, I'm dying now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you know, we're probably gonna wrap up here in just a couple minutes or anything. But you know, this is the film I have not watched in a very long time. I can't honestly remember the last time I had watched this film. But revisiting it for this review and everything, I realized just how much of a solid movie it really is, because it is one of James Cameron's earlier works. He's still fine-tuning his abilities as a storyteller, as a director, and you can see the early flashes of, and I say this with all sincerity, of the greatness that he would bring us a few years down the road, and just a couple of years after this movie, and of course with Terminator 2, Judgment Day. So, Troy, I'm gonna let you have the last word. The floor is yours.
Okay. You know, I'm just going to say that as far as James Cameron goes, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say he's a great filmmaker. Not all of his movies have been perfect. I haven't even necessarily liked every single one of his films, but you can never say he didn't put all of his heart, soul, blood, sweat, and tears into every movie he made. And he demanded the same of everyone that worked for him. Now, there's a lot of people that may not want to work with him in Hollywood, but you know you're going to be part of something big if you do a movie with him. And if you haven't seen The Abyss, hopefully just us talking about it has gotten you intrigued enough to go check it out, because it was a landmark film. There was a lot of things that you'll see in it, and you're like, oh, that's where that started. You know, that was the first place we saw this, and this is what led to this and this, and take an opportunity to go back and revisit what's kind of an unsung classic.
Yes, absolutely. So, and Troy, I want to thank you for joining me this evening, and of course to everybody in the chat who participated, who was talking throughout Netter Network. Mrs. Pacelli, great to have you in the chat, my dear, and cannot wait to get you on here live and everything, and talk film with you. Also to Cassier Garcia, good to see you. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thanks for all the great suggestions.
Yes, truly. Thank you so very much, Castilier, and look forward to having you in the chat again. So, I will let you all know I will be back next week, Thursday evening, with my friend Zach Leary, and we'll be doing a doubleheader review of two favorite films of ours. The Heist, starring Gene Hackman and Danny DeVito, and also a personal favorite of mine, also starring Gene Hackman, Danny DeVito, John Travolta, and Rene Russo, Get Shorty. And
yes. Good one.
And I do want to let you all know, just to give you a little heads up of what's coming up next month for the Ambassadorial Wing. March is going to be a little bit full of, shall I say, mayhem. We're going to be covering some crime dramas, some action-packed films, and so on. Me and Zach are also going to be doing a review, and Troy, if you'd like to be a part of this, I would be more than happy to have you, even your lovely wife, if she'd be interested. Sure. We're going to be doing a review of another great 80s classic, Scarface.
Ooh, say hello to my little friend.
So, I will, of course, send out updates on my social media accounts and everything once I get those reviews put together, and let you know when they're happening. So, but everybody, make sure you.
That's
go
another
check
Mary
out
Elizabeth Master Antonio film, by the way.
That's right. It is, isn't it? Yeah, she plays.
Yes, it is.
She plays Tony's sister. That's right.
Yep.
She plays Tony's sister. I almost forgot about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but everybody, you all have a great night. Have a great weekend. We will see you all next week. Stay ambassadorial, and remember, you cannot spell awesome without ambassadorial wing. And these are the ambassadors. Signing off.